All right, I think we're all here now. Welcome. I'm so thrilled to be welcoming all of you here to No War 2023. Of course, this is World Beyond War's annual global conference, and we're thrilled that you're here for the very start of it with us. My name is Rachel Small. I'm the Canada organizer with World Beyond War, and it's just such a huge pleasure. This event has been months in the making. So happy to be kicking it off with you right now. I wanted to share that between the speakers and registrants, we're seeing that people are joining today from at least 34 countries around the world. So I welcome all of you. I know some it's early afternoon, others it's very late at night. Thank you for being here all together with us in this space. Before we get really officially started, I'm just going to share some rather dull tech logistics just to make sure that everyone can stay with us for the whole weekend. All the sessions throughout the conference, like the one we're in right now, will have closed captioning enabled to make sure everyone can access what we're all saying. So within each session, at the bottom of your Zoom screen, you can click on the CC or live transcript button to enable the captions. You might have to click on the More button to get there. I do want to warn everyone that these captions are automatically generated by robots. So if they look a little weird, please excuse those errors. We will also be recording all sessions throughout the conference, and we'll share the recordings of those sessions with you all early next week. So as you've noticed, this year's conference is hosted on the Zoom Events platform, sort of an expanded version of the usual Zoom. So throughout the weekend, you can use that same Zoom conference link that took you here today to access the lobby all 3 days and to access all of the different sessions. So from the lobby, that other window you were in before you were here, you can access the lobby chat on the right side. It's kind of an intercom. Everyone will see what you put there, so only put things that make sense for everyone to see, not private conversations, but we'll put important announcements there. There also at the top of that lobby screen are different tabs to make your way around the conference. So there are sessions where you can view all the schedule for the weekend. There's an expo tab where you can visit the different expo booths, including one where people will always get a chance to discuss the session that's just happened together. There's a sponsors tab where you can read more about the sponsoring organizations. And there's a registrants tab where you can look up and start a chat with people who you meet throughout the weekend who are attending this conference. Just like in a regular Zoom meeting or webinar, when this session is over, you can click the little red leave button, usually at the bottom right of your screen. That will leave this session and it'll close this Zoom window, but then you'll still have the lobby open underneath so you can get to other parts of the conference. If you do have any tech problems throughout the weekend, you can message us in that main lobby chat or feel free to email helpdesk@WorldBeyondWar.org, and we will help you get back into the conference and get where you need to go. Now, I'd love to take a minute to thank the incredible allies of ours who are not only doing important work and in many cases taking anti-war action with us regularly, but have also sponsored this conference, who have made it possible for this weekend to happen. So a huge thank you to Dr. Michael D. Knox, Lauren Steiner, U.S. Peace Memorial Foundation, Conscience Canada, Roots Action Education Fund, the War Prevention Initiative, Addicted to War, Concordia Health, Fellowship of Reconciliation, Peace Action Network of Lancaster, Peace Fresno, Stuart Ross, Veterans for Peace Chapter 72, and Vote World Parliament. You can learn more about these sponsors in the sponsor tab, and many are also hosting expo booths where you can talk to them one-on-one. And a huge thank you as well to the 66 organizations. I won't read out the list, but it's on our website. These are organizations around the world who do incredible work and have endorsed this conference and helped to promote it. Speaking of promoting it, we would love for you to share what you're learning here with the world, to live tweet, post on Facebook, post on Instagram, etc. Involve others in this conversation. Please use the hashtag #NoWar2023 when you do. And we'll be live tweeting this conference on our Twitter, World Beyond War. We'll also share stuff elsewhere on social media. Before I bring up David to introduce the content of this conference, I hope you'll all humor me with a group photo. We're all looking so lovely here tonight, and I'd love to take a group photo. anyone who would like to, please turn on your video camera, show off that blue scarf, but if you don't have one, that's fine too. I'm gonna take a few seconds because there's quite a lot of us here, so give me just a few seconds to take some group photos. I think I've got half of you. I have to do the other half. I love the peace signs, the big smiles. This is great. All right, just one more. Wonderful. Thank you so much. Now I will pass the mic over to David Swanson.
Thank you, Rachel, and thank you to you and Greta and everybody else who's made this event happen. Welcome, everyone, to No War 2023. This is World Beyond War's annual conference. It's our 8th annual conference. Though we have existed for almost 10 years, we began these conferences exactly 8 years ago. We've had 2 conferences in Washington, D.C., one in Toronto, Canada, one in Limerick, Ireland, and we've now had 4 online. I'm wearing my sky blue scarf. I see many of you are wearing your sky blue scarves. If you have one, please wear it. If you requested one when you registered for this conference just recently, it is indeed in the mail to you. The scarf means that we all live under the same sky on a planet we are working to rid of all war and to bring to a just and sustainable peace. You can learn more about those at WorldBeyondWar.org/blue. World Beyond War is growing. We will be hearing from some of our growing number of chapters soon, and we are becoming more effective. But so is war propaganda. Over the 3 days of this conference, we want to address the most powerful argument for war. As you know, our website and other publications and countless events have made the case that war is immoral, that it endangers us rather than protecting us, that it erodes liberties, promotes bigotry, wastes our wealth, and threatens our environment, that it is not inevitable, beneficial, or even justifiable. It is relatively easy for us to show that war is a choice made by humans, not an outside force, that various human societies have existed without war, and that any particular war could have been avoided with wiser choices in the years leading up to it. Our book on a global security system outlines a world in which structures of law and conflict resolution, economics, and enterprises could render war highly unlikely instead of, as today, the end goal of vast efforts and energies. The best answer to what should people do when a military attacks them will always be to create a world in which militaries don't attack you, but that hardly helps anyone in the moment of the attack. For decades now, in my experience, living in the nation that launches the most wars, the mere act of thinking about alternatives to militarily fighting back against an invasion is almost universally frowned upon. In fact, a common argument for militarism by leftists in the United States is, how dare you tell victims of the US what to do? And it's no step at all from there to, how dare you tell victims of Russia what to do? We get both of those at the moment for the same war. 12 years ago, Erica Chenoweth came up with data suggesting that nonviolent revolutions are on average far more likely to succeed than violent ones, and the successes far longer lasting. This did not mean any of the familiar misunderstandings, such as that violent revolutions have never succeeded, or nonviolent ones never failed, or that nonviolent revolutions don't confront violence from the other side, or that nonviolent action cannot be used for evil ends. But what did it mean for the question, what should people do when a military attacks them? Most of the examples were overthrows of domestic tyrants or unjust policies, not responses to foreign invasions. Well, we started putting together a list of the most relevant examples, which you can find at WorldBeyondWar.org/list. When French and Belgian troops occupied the Ruhr in 1923, the German government called on its citizens to resist without physical violence. Through nonviolent non-cooperation, people turned public opinion in Britain, the US, and even in Belgium and France in favor of the occupied Germans, and the French troops were withdrawn. In the final years of the German occupation of Denmark and Norway during World War II, the Nazis effectively no longer controlled the populations. Nonviolent actions led by Mohandas Gandhi and by Bacha Khan's unarmed peace army were key to removing the British from India. When the Soviet military invaded Czechoslovakia in 1968, there were demonstrations, a general strike, refusal to cooperate, removal of street signs, persuasion of troops. Despite clueless leaders conceding, the takeover was slowed and the credibility of the Soviet Communist Party ruined. Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia freed themselves from Soviet occupation through nonviolent resistance. In fact, Ukrainian students nonviolently ended Soviet rule over Ukraine. In the first Palestinian Intifada in the late 1980s to early 1990s, much of the subjugated population effectively became self-governing entities through nonviolent non-cooperation. The Liberian Civil War of 1999 to 2003 was ended by nonviolent action, etc. There are many examples, including the nonviolent ousting of colonial rulers in Africa and including the nonviolent liberation of occupied towns in Ukraine between 2014 and 2021, as well as, of course, numerous nonviolent overthrows of military dictatorships, which are what successful military invasions seek to create. Many examples on our list are outright successes. Many are partial successes, suggesting the potential of a tactic that in not one single case ever has shown its maximum power, as easily imagined, but never established. The question, what should people do when a military attacks them, remains for the moment. What should people who have not been thoroughly trained in unarmed resistance do when a military attacks them? Of course, the difficulty of what they can do is impacted by what the rest of the world does. If the options available include making use of hundreds of billions of dollars worth of free weapons, then they could include making use of hundreds of billions of dollars for something else. An invaded territory could quickly be provided not only with endless weapons, but also, or instead, with a trained team of unarmed peacekeepers and trainers. If money is no concern, as hardly anything can be imagined that would approach the costs of militarism, teams of many thousands from all over the world could be provided in combination with diplomatic efforts, mediation, and negotiations, and in combination with the wildest financial incentives imaginable. New schools, hospitals, and sports complexes for every village that commits to nonviolence, tolerance, and democratic decision-making. Of course, if governments were pursuing those things and putting money into something other than weapons, we wouldn't have the wars in the first place. My point is that there are a variety of tools that could be used in response to a military invasion, and unarmed resistance is one of them. It would be better understood and it would be more effective if we prepared for it in the way that most of our governments prepare for war, and if the world's media outlets celebrated it instead of focusing on violence. It's quite a high hurdle to appeal to a country that's been militarily invaded after decades of military defense and offense preparations and the accompanying cultural indoctrination in the supposed necessity of military defense, to appeal to said country to construct on the fly an unarmed civilian defense plan and act on it despite near universal lack of training or even comprehension. We're finding it to be a high hurdle just to get access to bring in an unarmed team to defend a nuclear power plant in the middle of a war. A more reasonable proposal is for national governments that are not at war to establish departments of unarmed civilian defense. A properly prepared unarmed defense department, something that might require a major investment of 2 or 3% of a military budget, could make a nation ungovernable if attacked by another country or a coup d'etat, and therefore immune from conquest. This means training an entire society to resist physically, socially, economically, and psychologically, to block streets, to not cooperate with orders, to dissuade invading and occupying troops from following orders, to shut down infrastructure, to make nothing work. These preparations should be widely publicized and totally transparent to potential adversaries. The case of Lithuania offers some illumination of a way forward, but a warning as well, I think. Having used nonviolent action to expel the Soviet military, the nation put in place an unarmed defense plan, but it has no plan to give military defense a back seat or to eliminate it. Militarists have been hard at work framing civilian-based defense as subsidiary to and in assistance of military action. We need nations to take unarmed defense as seriously as Lithuania, and then much more so. Nations without militaries, like Costa Rica, Iceland, etc., could come at this from the other end by developing unarmed defense departments in place of nothing. But nations with militaries and weapons industries subservient to imperial powers will have the harder task of developing unarmed defense while knowing that an honest appraisal may require eliminating military defense. I'm looking forward over the course of this conference to hearing the stories of unarmed activists from around the world. I expect they will inspire us all with ideas of what is possible and what we should be working to create in the years ahead. It is my duty to point out that there is a donation link in this fancy Zoom conference and to encourage you to use it. World Beyond War has not yet received a single contract from any military or government, and we cannot expect to. We depend on all of you to continue growing. We especially rely on recurring donations, and we publicly thank those recurring donors who don't choose to be anonymous, and we offer thank you gifts to them. So thank you to all of our current and future recurring donors. I'm going to try to share a little graphic for 5 seconds here. Hope you can see it. Hope there's nothing blocking it. And well,
it looks good, David.
If you can see it, and I can remember what I need to say because I can't see that, if you happen to be in the United States, you can follow the instructions on this graphic. You can text "No War" to 707070, and something wonderful will happen. If you are from anywhere else in the world, or if you're from the United States, you can also click a link that should be in the chat. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, David. The next portion of this welcome address, we're going to be hearing from our World Beyond War chapters around the world. And this is really my pleasure every day at World Beyond War to be working with our volunteer chapter coordinators around the world, who are really the ones who are doing the work in their communities, advocating for the abolition of war. So today we want to inspire you and give some examples of those chapters around the world. So we're going to start by hearing from Liz Remmerswaal, who is both the Vice President of the World Beyond War Global Board and also the chapter coordinator for the New Zealand chapter. So go ahead, Liz.
Kia ora, thank you, Greta. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa na mihi nui kia koutou. I'm greeting you in Te Reo Māori, which is the language of Aotearoa, New Zealand. And I come to you from Te Mataua Māori, Ngāti Kaungunu country, and from the basis of the founding document, the Treaty of Waitangi, which acknowledges Indigenous partnership with the Crown here. Welcome everybody, so great to see everybody, and I just want to share some of the actions that we're involved with working locally, nationally and globally. Over the last year, we've been involved with a number of campaigns and worked with partners, supporting them as well as voicing our concerns to government on relevant issues. So here's some of the highlights. When President Zelensky spoke to our parliament requesting more military support, we challenged them to ask for a ceasefire and peace talks instead. a request which unfortunately fell on deaf ears, as did our concerns with New Zealand becoming more involved with NATO, which was illustrated by our prime ministers attending the NATO summits in Europe these last 2 years. We condemn the fact that military spending is increasing here, despite the fact that the climate challenges and adverse weather events are also increasing, and we need resources to prepare for these events. We have also been lobbying government on its space policy and supporting Rongamai Wahine in Mahia, as they voiced their concerns for Rocket Lab launches, satellites with US military payloads. In June, we took part in the Global Peace Wave with contributions from all around the country in creative, musical, theatrical ways, as well as including those calling out their concerns that New Zealand could be supporting the AUKUS partnership, which is building nuclear-powered submarines in Australia. We have also been working with our Australian, Pacific and Asian partners in the Pacific Peace Network, educating the public on the Talisman Sabre military exercises in Australia, which involve 30,000 troops from 13 countries and are focused on practicing to evade China. We are also part of a network looking at what security really means for our country and stimulating discussion and workshops on a balanced approach to this. And we are working on a range of issues with the Peace Foundation's International Affairs and Disarmament Committee, emphasizing our country's historic stand as a nuclear-free and independent state. We created a delegation to the World Balance Conference in Cuba, and 3 of us contributed talks to the Global Forum in Havana in January, and have also created another partnership to work together in future for conferences, and also visited chapters in Vancouver and Victoria, Canada. And we took part in the World Peace Council Congress in Vietnam, developing links in our region with this group and learning more about the history behind it. Finally, we've been working in our local community in Hawke's Bay to focus on creating non-violent ways to deal with conflict by gifting 43 peace poles to schools, churches, marae, hospitals, prisons, and parks. Here's some video highlights from the event that we created to mark this occasion. And the focus of this day was honouring our bicultural and multicultural roots and recognising that peace is built on justice. Kia ora, thank you.
Thank you, Liz. Rachel, are you able to pull up that short video?
Yes, I'm just getting it going.
So we are planting seeds for the future, and we are looking forward to working together. And Hastings, Hiratonga, Napier, Hawke's Bay, let's make our region a vision, an inspiration for the whole of Aotearoa. of what peacemaking and living in non-violence can look like. We can be leaders. That's what we do in this area with our wonderful, visionary, hardworking leaders and our amazing people and our connection that we have. So that is the winner, that is the challenge, that is our task.
Learn a language.
Thank you so much, Liz. And now we are going to pass the mic to Al Mytty, who is currently one of the co-coordinators of the new World Beyond War Illinois chapter in the United States, and previously was a chapter coordinator of the World Beyond War Florida chapter. So please go ahead, Al. We'd love to hear about your new efforts in Illinois.
Wish I could report what Liz just reported, by the way. But so thank you. Thanks for everything World Beyond War does all over the globe to abolish war and bring about a sustainable peace. It takes a lot of optimism to attempt those goals. And I know that this conference is being attended by many very optimistic and hopeful people. World Beyond War has truly become a global organization, and I am pleased and proud to be a small part of it. Here in Illinois, in the United States, a dedicated group of folks is steadfastly working to create an organization that we hope will both grow and be around for a long time. I'm pleased to be the co-coordinator of Illinois for a World Beyond War, along with Lois Foster, who is an expert in restorative justice. We have a steering committee that includes people I want to name now: Daphne Agason, Marge Francois, Chuck Lederman, Karen Johnson, Madonna Watasek Healy, Julie Watkins, and Rich Whitney. We're a new chapter, as Greta mentioned, and in our inaugural event that included an inspiring message about peace and nonviolence and an end to war from Kathy Kelly, and we are proud that Kathy lives in Illinois. At another event included a presentation by David Swanson, who educated us on the growth and accomplishments of World Beyond War. The goals of our chapter are summarized in our foundational statements that I'd like to share now by sharing screen, I hope. Let me see if I get that to work there. And it would be right there, I hope. Okay. What I want to focus on is that second part there, what we envision. By offering ongoing peace education, countering the dominant pro-war media narrative, and making efforts to influence our elected officials to stop supporting and financing militarism and war, we strive to end war. Through growth and a wide membership base, we can be more effective and offer wider varieties for wider opportunities for actions that align with members' interests, abilities, and locations. We can also ally with other Illinois groups committed to peace, advocacy, activism, and action. So those three things. For example, on education, we are planning an event in December on teaching folks about the aspects of unarmed civilian protection. The second one on regarding the media, one of our goals, that's getting the word out on how much of the U.S. and worldwide media are pro-war and how they devote very little airtime or print to alternatives to war. And in so doing, they help to perpetuate the myths of war. And thirdly, we want to influence our elected officials by writing letters, creating petitions, meeting with them, and taking other actions to let them know that militarism is consuming way too much of the U.S. budget and is destroying the world. We are collaborating with similar organizations around the state, including folks like with Pax Christi, Chicago Area Peace Action, the Southern Illinois and Chicago West Suburban Peace Coalitions, Code Pink, Nonviolent Peace Force, Patria Bene, and others. So if you live in Illinois or know someone who lives in Illinois, please have them contact me, and my email is there on the screen. So thank you very much.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Al. And next, I'm going to bring up to the mic Jane Obiora of the new World Beyond War Nigeria chapter. World Beyond War has had several new chapters spring up in the past year or so across Africa. So we're so excited to have you, Jane, and especially it's quite late there in Nigeria. So we appreciate you joining at the late night. So please go ahead.
Right. Greetings, everyone. I'm from Nigeria. Good evening. It's already night. We say good evening. I'm happy to be with you. To join this global conference, and a lot have been said. I have a slide, and I think it will be shared. Yeah. So to justify what I want to share, I will be brief. In making, can everyone see my slide?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Yeah, like you said, we just started. We're a new baby born, and we're running fast. And we are World Beyond War Nigerian Chapter. I'll be talking on this to see what we're doing. It's a robust one. I wouldn't want to waste much time, but what I want to say, like my colleague who is from the union says that we have to do a lot to get this broad vision accomplished. So conflicts have really wreaked human havoc and destroyed the planet's endeavors. The fund, like Mr. David said, the fund's pain and security has already, and war and militarism is enough to end global hunger and put our healthcare facility and education, give us a decent housing. So this is why we are here passionately to, as a chapter coordinator, to work to see, we join the vision of World Beyond War Global to achieve this, to end war. Although in Nigeria, we don't have war like that, we have more of crisis, conflicts, and extremisms. But that is a small scale which can be escalated to a larger war. So what we want to promote much is just healthy, inclusive, and peaceful society. And we have this mission. We joined the vision already, and we have a mission to mobilize state and non-state actors to build peace and promote inclusive, just, and peaceful society through education program. We intend to roll out program in schools and gather people, mobilize local actions to see that they get the awareness that is needed. Like Mr. Davidson says, that how can we achieve non-violent approach rather than using militarism? We also engage in advocacy. Right now, we're doing a lot of advocacy to get people, because our holistic is all people need to be on board to achieve this global goal. We also want to use the media approach, art and sports, and as well partnership. We cannot do this all. We need partnership from all and sundry. We have this objective to achieve, which I may not have time to read it out because this is a robust slide, but time is around. So this specific vision, mission, and objective is what we'll be looking to guide us in all that we are doing. Like I've just said, this is the focus area because we have checked Nigeria is a heterogeneous society. We have, it's complex and sensitive. So aside peace building and education, weapon divestment, because we have this armed proliferation everywhere. People possess weapons, people possess arms in their own way, illegal and legal. We also want to use because injustice and non-accountability has been the main points of corruption and all what, and gender equality we want to work to see, because often when there is conflict, women and children and the youth are the front runner. You and I will also agree that war has devastated the environment we live on, and drug use has been. So these are the focus area we would want to focus. Our strength is very broad, but we know when we roll out activities. These are the methodologies we want to be using to engage stakeholders and non-stakeholders. We work in, like I say, Nigeria is very large. We have about 36 states and 775 local governments is very huge. So we'll be working nationally, which is Nigeria, and we trickle down to geopolitical zones, and we trickle down to the state and local governments. We just started and we are running out fast. We are getting governments, we are getting security officers with us, we are building momentum, we are getting traditional religious people, civil society media to be part of us. We have a platform we have established, and we are restructured. We have technical groups that we have formed, cutting across all these zones that I've told you, and we are marvelously doing well. We just had a national public dialogue, which Mr. David, I thank you so much to have supported us, and Greta, I have never allowed you rested. You've been very immense support to us to have that achieved. These are the activities we have just fully done. We launched, like I said, we have launched the chapter. We set the governance structures of formation. We signed these pledges. We had a publication that we have worked on and we'll be sharing after the conference with Greta and David. You and I will be attuned to know that Nigeria, we are preparing to send a military troop to Nigeria, and ECOWAS on that coup d'etat that has been, and we tried doing a lot to see that will be stopped. But thank God the National Assembly in Nigeria took a bold step to stop the president not to do that. So that was what we wanted to roll out. There's a campaign we wanted rolling out to stop Nigerian government sending troops to Nigeria. We have some public meetings, and the ones that will be forthcoming, we're using social media campaign and media professionals. We are trying to also engage in art and sports soon, and others. These are our audience. These are the people we will be targeting to work with: the government institutions, executive legislators, policymakers, community influencers, gatekeepers, youth, and women. Am I audible? Everyone hearing me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, media, researchers and academia, civil society, collaboration and partnership is what we are key on, because to build peace is a very huge and broad endeavor and intervention. So we'll be seeking for collaboration from everywhere that we think, whoever that feel that peace is what is needed in the planet Earth. We are. Soon we'll be engaging with in our public dialogue, Office of the National Security, we're able to attend, and soon we'll be working to collaborate with them because they have a lot of activity. They said they'll be rolling out, and that's what we feel that we have set a social platform handles and a few that we have. These are these. Thank you so much. I think this is what I have to present for now. And maybe next time we'll have a robust things to say much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jane, and congratulations to the new Nigeria chapter. We've also recently launched chapters in Burundi and in Senegal as well. So really exciting growth. And we have the first ever World Beyond War Africa conference coming up in November. And I can put a link for that in the chat. Thanks to the idea of our World Beyond War Cameroon chapter coordinator, Guy, who has sort of kickstarted this, which is hoping to be the first and an annual World Beyond War Africa conference to focus on that region of the world this year virtually, and in future years, hopefully in person. So you can check out that link in the chat. And next, I want to bring up to the mic Cym Gomery of the World Beyond War Montréal Chapter. So go ahead, Cym. Oh, Cym, I'm going to make you a co-host again.
There. Okay, now I just got your little message.
Okay, there you go.
Okay, hi, everybody. So Rachel's going to help me with the screen share. Okay, here we go. Thank you. So hello, everybody. I'm going to talk about peace activism in Montreal. My name is Cym Gomery. I'm the coordinator of Montreal for a World Beyond War. I'm a Montreal activist and community organizer. I've worked with activism for environment, climate, animal rights, and now most predominantly peace. I'm a hiker, reader, and I love documentary films. About Montreal for a World Beyond War. This is a chapter that was launched in November 2021. We're called Montréal pour un monde sans guerre in French. And we're one of many peace groups here in Montreal, as you will see. So here's just a sampling of a few of the peace groups here in Montreal. There's a Collectif Échec à la Guerre, which is a coalition of peace groups, which has 33 members. A lot of them are unions and things like that, but it has a good smattering of bona fide peace groups as well in the membership, including our chapter. Canadian Foreign Policy Institute, with whom we've worked quite a lot, and which does amazing work. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. Independent Jewish Voices and Canadians for Justice and Peace in the Middle East, who do a lot of work for Israel-Palestine peace. So talking about the different peace groups, we have some traditional peace groups, and by that I mean peace groups that do a lot of physical out there in the world actions. We have the Marxist-Leninist Party of Quebec, which are very strong here in Montreal, and we have Mouvement Québécois pour la Paix. The Marxist-Leninists are on the left there. We are all holding up signs saying Canada out of NATO. And the same thing is being echoed in another protest, which this time by Mouvement Québécois pour la Paix, no to NATO. And that's the banner they held up at all the rallies. We have a lot of peace personalities, I call them, who are just on their own, who are just such a going concern that everybody knows them and looks up to them. Here's two. One is Yves Engler. He's written books, articles, he's given interviews, and he's well known, and he has a weekly show which is attended by a lot of local people. And then there's Dimitri Lascaris, who was still is a lawyer, but he's become very active as a peace activist, and he traveled to Russia to see for himself what it was like, and then blogged about it later. And he's come under a lot of criticism because he stood up for peace, people immediately pegged him as a pro-Russian. So these are the events, some of the events that we've done so far this year. We had a rally for peace in Ukraine, a peace in Yemen action, Radio Canada rally, CanSec. Anyway, you'll see all these. I'll go through them one by one. So, okay, in February, we had a peace in Ukraine rally, which was organized by Échec à la Guerre. If you look there up in the top right, that's Mercedes Roberge, who's one of the movers and shakers in Échec à la Guerre, giving her introductory opening speech. And then down below on the right, that's yours truly. And then on the left, these are people from the local chapter who showed up at that particular event. There's Claire, Allison, Sally, Diane, and Robert. In March, the Canada-wide Peace and Justice Network launched a whole big series of events across Canada for Canada to stop arming Saudi Arabia. So that was the poster. We wrote a statement. I wrote a statement with Asa, which we displayed and shared. If you continue to the next one, you'll. So our event, and thank you to Rachel for thinking up this idea. Rachel came up with the idea and with all of the documents that we needed And the idea was to bring a banker's box full of all of the signed petitions that had been done to Global Affairs Canada and present it to them. And luckily that day, Yves Engler, who's kind of a star in my eyes, he showed up for that. And we delivered signatures representing 1 million Canadians. And later on, not because of us, but I couldn't help noticing that China brokered peace talks with Syria, which kind of helped to cool the jets of the war against Yemen. If you want, do we have time to show the video?
I don't think so, unfortunately, but we can link to it online.
No worries. So in April, we did well, I didn't do a rally. This was organized by Mouvement Québécois pour la Paix. So there was we went to Radio Canada, which has offices which is the French version of the CBC here in Montreal. And we went just to talk about how the media gives us a false impression of the world and how they tend to be warmongers. Continue. In May, there was the CanSec protest in Ottawa, which is a horrible arms fair that happens every year in Canada's capital city, Ottawa. And one of my members had the idea to make costumes. That's her in the top right, Wendy Lehman. She came as a warmonger, and that photo was kind of iconic. It was shared a lot. There's me in my less professional looking warmonger costume with somebody from the Quakers. Okay. In July 2023, this was part of the whole peace wave all over the world, where there was a 24 hours peace wave. And this again was Rachel's idea. We invited Sakura Sanders from the Beehive Design Collection to do a presentation in a beautiful park, La Fontaine, here in Montreal. So I just have a little description of what the Beehive Design Collective is from their site. It's a wildly motivated, all volunteer activist arts collective dedicated to cross-pollinating the grassroots by creating art. So this is a beautiful poster that they made, and they talked about resistance, grassroots resistance in Mesoamerica. So, okay. Also in July, we had a Cones Not Drones. This was one of many, many Cones Not Drones. This was the first, but there were many afterwards, two in Toronto, I think, and at least one in Hamilton, and maybe one in Ottawa as well, where we gave people ice cream cones in a beautiful park and passed out flyers telling them why we don't think it's a good idea for Canada to spend $5 billion buying spy planes to kill people. In every year, Montreal is a twin city with Hiroshima. So every year there's a very formal ceremony usually in the botanical gardens. So we were there. These are on the left, that's me with a couple of, well, in the center is Louise Royer. She's with the Catholic Diocese. So she's always been at this thing for many, many years. And on the far left is Jacques Boucher, who's a wonderful man who's done a lot of activism since way, way, way before I was involved in peace activism. He's a very religious person. Continue. And there were some Chinese, Japanese people from students that were flown in, and these are various dignitaries. Go ahead. I just wanted you to mark your calendars because I was thinking of doing a film presentation, but CFPI already had this idea and they beat me to it, which made me very happy. So they're doing a virtual screening of The Vow from Hiroshima, which is a wonderful film, on September 26th. That's my contact information. It'll probably be shared. And was there anything else? Oh, yes, I want to say thank you. And thank you. That's it.
Thank you so much, Cym. And last but not least, I want to bring up to the mic Stefania Sani and Janet Parker of the World Beyond War Madison Chapter in Madison, Wisconsin, United States. So please go ahead, Stefania and Janet. You're currently muted. We can't hear you.
That's right, of course. So I'm Janet. And I'm Stefania. And you could roll our slides, please. We have some pictures that we want to share of events that we have done. We got our chapter started last fall, and we're just so grateful to World Beyond War for being such a great support and launch pad for everything that we do. So we're just gonna, I think these are animated to just advance, and you can just see what we've been up to while we chit chat a little bit. So we've done many public events to raise up the idea of war abolition. And we speak up for diplomacy to end the war in Ukraine and to end all wars. We've done dozens of public actions, and some of them got TV and radio coverage, and we've gotten articles and letters to the editor published. We've met with our elected officials and visited their offices often as part of walks that we do and pickets. And we've done lots of petitioning to ask our elected officials to stop funding war. Tonight, we're actually, Bernie Sanders is speaking in town, and we're going to take this poster behind us and go and greet Bernie Sanders and ask him to vote no on $24 billion more for war. Often there are only a few of us at our events. Sometimes there are, 10, 15 more than that. But we're fine. We're out and we're visible, and we're here. We're anti-war. Get used to it. We like being out in public. Last night we had an event to watch a webinar together and prepare for a speak out demonstration that we're going to be doing next Saturday. And 3 people who we had met tabling at Farmers Market during the last month came to the event. So it felt good to see those 3 new people there. We're hoping to raise money and hire 1 or 2 students to do anti-war organizing on campus. And we're so grateful to you, Greta. Greta helps us just about every day. And thank you so much, David, and everybody at World Beyond War. Your vision and your inspiration and your fellowship and your help makes it possible for us to act here in Madison.
And thank you for me also. You have been very helpful for us to act here in Madison. One thing that we have tried to do, and I think we have succeeded to a big extent, is to connect with the other like-minded groups that have, maybe different goal, but similar to us. One of us was, and still is, the Back from the Brink campaign, where a local group has succeeded to petition the city council and the mayor to divest, for them to divest from companies that have some nuclear components to them. And the other thing that is happening here in Madison particularly is that we have an Air Force base, a National Guard Air Force base, that has accepted the placement of the F-35 fighter jets. And we have been very active to speak out against that. So these are some of the things that we are doing. I'm not sure if the impact that we are having, but it feels really good to do it. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you so much, Stefania and Janet. It's an inspiration and a pleasure to work with you. And that is a wrap for our chapter section of the welcome address. That was just a small sampling of the many chapters around the world, and we encourage folks to go to our website, WorldBeyondWar.org, and you can find a chapter near you, or if there isn't one, you can work with us to start a chapter. And we will be hosting, we'll send more information about this, but after the conference on October 7th, we will be hosting a How to Start a Chapter session if you're interested, if you've been inspired by these highlights and you're interested in organizing a chapter locally. And with that, I'm going to pass it off to Kathy Kelly, who is the World Beyond War board president, who will kind of wrap up this welcome address by grounding us in the moment and leading a little period of reflection as we continue on with the rest of the conference. So go ahead, Kathy.
Well, thank you so much to Greta and to all of the people who've gathered us together today. It's been a real privilege to kind of experience this kaleidoscope of so many intentional desires to bring about a better world. And, you know, a number of us are wearing the blue scarf. And I was so fortunate to be somebody who visited the Afghan peace volunteers many times over the past decade. And, you know, they really embraced what Jane was talking about in Nigeria, you know, to advance healthcare and education and infrastructure. And at a time when, you know, at the top of the surge, the United States was investing $2 million per soldier in Afghanistan. And these youngsters, with just pennies really, were trying to help widows create heavy blankets that could be distributed in refugee camps, and trying to organize a school for street children. And they wore this blue scarf, in part because of the inspiration that so many of you bring. And the way that Pete Seeger depicted it when he sang, he said, "One blue sky above us, one ocean lapping at our shore, one earth so green and round, who could ask for more? And because I love you, I'll give it one more try, to tell our rainbow race it's too soon to die." And we'll be joined this weekend by a very special activist who is living out Pete Seeger's words in the face of considerable risk, Yuri Shelyazhenko from Kyiv. It's facing serious charges. They're charging him with justifying the Russian aggression. Now, the good news is that even though people were quite anxious about a hearing that was scheduled for last week, the prosecutor didn't show up. And so it seems like perhaps the delivery of 1,000 or more signatures that David helped to organize was certainly something that astonished the judges. And they even waved bye-bye to our board treasurer, John Ruhr, and others who were there in support for Yuri. But he still is at considerable risk. He could be sent to prison. He could be imprisoned before trial. He could become a broken person, but he persists. And I just want to read to you words that Yuri said on, it was a Democracy Now! Interview in May of 2022. Yuri said, "Instead of breaking the last bonds of humanity out of rage, we need, more than ever, to preserve and strengthen venues of communication and cooperation between all people on earth. And each individual effort of that sort has a value." And so, my friends, we face a huge challenge. We're looking into the gigantic maw of ecological collapse, possible new pandemics, nuclear weapon proliferation. And at times it may seem like we're a bit small, but I think the wisdom that David laid out to us about the alternative, the humane alternatives we can pursue, and the assurance that we catch courage from one another, that courage that gives us the ability to control our fears and not be governed by fear, and the leadership that Yuri Shelyazhenko brings to us at this particular moment in time, gives us plenty to reflect about together. And so maybe spend, in the name of grounding ourselves, just a short time in silence, and then pledge to one another that we certainly won't give up in this special opportunity we face now to work together for a world beyond war. So I'll just repeat one more time Pete Seeger's words. One blue sky above us, one ocean lapping at all shores, one earth so green and round, who could ask for more? And because I love you, I'll give it one more try to tell our rainbow race it's too soon to die. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kathy. And with that, we will transition to the keynote address, and I will bring up to the mic David Swanson, WorldBeyondWar's Executive Director, who will introduce the keynote speaker.
Thank you, Greta, and thank you, Kathy. Wonderful. And thank you, Pete Seeger. So we are privileged to have for our keynote speech on the topic of the potential of nonviolent resistance to occupation and militarism, Jørgen Johansen, who is an independent peace researcher, a bibliophile, and a troublemaker living amongst the trees in southern Sweden. He runs Irene Publishing and has built up a huge library for scholars to use while spending time at his small center for writers and activists. After 45 years of work in more than 100 countries, he has settled and is inspired by Cicero, quote, "If you have a garden and a library, you have everything you need." Jørgen Johansen.
Thank you. I have been thinking a lot about what to say in this session. I don't know any of you, at least very few of you personally, so I don't know what you already know about. But I have decided to try to have an overview of my work on alternative to militarism and war. I want to start by taking up my presentation and share a screen with you. Let's see if this is functioning. Do you see my screen?
Yes, perfect.
Thank you. So 2023, that is 100 years since one of the most interesting use of nonviolence against occupation in European history in the Ruhr area in Germany in 1923. I will come back to that in a little moment. So I will try to cover 100 years. Of course, that's impossible in just a few minutes that I have at my disposal. If you want to contact me later, here is my email address. I'm one of those who reply to emails within 48 hours if they have relevant comments or questions. I don't want anything else from you than questions and comments to this topic. If you start sending me all the stuff, I put my spam filter on you. I hope that's okay. My understanding of wars is that all conflicts are born equal and have the same right to recognition. But we live in a war where violent conflicts dominate. They dominate media, textbooks, public discussions, politics, etc. And war is not a conflict. War is a means used by some stakeholders in some conflicts. And if we cannot separate the conflicts from the means, we cannot expect to see other solutions than those the dominant discourse presents. And that is my main problem as a teacher when I have seminars or lecturing at universities. The public discourse is so extremely powerful, so it's almost impossible for ordinary people who haven't spent time studying these issues to understand that we have other options. Just want to get rid of there's something wrong with my screen here. Okay, let me see. Why can't I? Oh, okay. When I talk about nonviolent actions, I want just to clarify that the term is very often misunderstood and misused. In the following presentation, I will use the term based on the theories by my friend and former student Stellan Windhagen, who in his PhD defined nonviolent actions as actions without the use of violence and against violence. If those two criteria are fulfilled, you have a nonviolent action. And violence can mean different things, but in this context, I will discuss and analyze stuff that is mainly focusing on physical violence against human beings. There's a number of other ways of looking at violence, but I don't want to cover that in these 45 minutes. Nonviolence against occupation. I need to do it like this. A number of different approaches and techniques have been used against occupation. I will mention a few later. Most of them can only be used after occupation is done. The wish to deter or prevent attacks in other ways is problematic with nonviolent techniques. If nonviolence is used successfully multiple times, it could have a deterrent effect, but most of it is used when the occupation is a fact. It has been used against authoritarian regimes. We have seen some examples of deterrent, but it's not very common. Most of it take place after the situation is horrible. Then you could use nonviolent to get rid of the occupier or get rid of the dictatorship. What is that? Sorry. But we have a number of impressive cases. The problem with most of the cases in our box on nonviolent actions and revolutions is that very little preparation is done. People take to the streets and are very often badly prepared. They start to organize when the situation is horrible. Every time there is a war going on, I get journalists on my phone asking what to do with nonviolence. They never ask me 10 years ahead. They only ask me when the bombs are falling. And that is very late for nonviolent action. There are a few exceptions. I could go into some of those in the discussion later. But in most cases, people act spontaneously and have quite often weak organizations. It's difficult to organize when the heat is high and the situation is horrible and the violence is going on. If you haven't prepared it in advance, you have problems. Still, the results are quite impressive if you look on the last 40 years, at least compared to what we knew about only 40 years ago. When I started to study these examples, there was Gandhi and a handful of other examples. Today we have hundreds of cases that are studied and described in the literature. And many of them are analyzed, mainly by people who are either being part of it themselves or are very eager to look into the nonviolent aspects. It's not very critical analyzing going on. They're either celebrating good stories or maybe trying to be objective, but the critical studies of what went wrong, what peace activists have done of stupid things, is very seldom described and analyzed. I mean, we can't only describe them, we need to do more serious studies. There are some similarities between nonviolent actions against occupation and against dictatorships. An occupation by a foreign power has several similarities to living in an authoritarian regime. In the latter, people are occupied by their own state. In my view, people in the US are occupied by their own state today, to a certain degree, and in a number of European states as well. Most of the research is done on resistance against authoritarian regimes because we have more cases of them. And as I said in the beginning, the French troops occupied the Ruhr area in 1923. It was a fascinating story the next 18 months to 2 years, when the local people took to the streets, protested, went on strikes, and they forced the French troops to return in August 1925. Large-scale protests and civil disobedience were used, a number of strikes in the factories, And the region became too difficult to control for the French troops. So the French troops returned home. In total, 120 people lost their lives in these clashes, but the French couldn't continue to occupy the Ruhr area. There are not very much written in English about it. There is a PhD by Barbara Miller in German, big, heavy book. For those who doesn't read German, there is an English version coming out next year, a shorter and more updated version of this story. And there are a few other books, but not very deep analysis of what happened. Norway in the Second World War was mentioned by David earlier, together with Denmark. When the German regime wanted to introduce Nazi teaching in the schools in Norway, a huge majority of the 15,000 teachers refused, and there is serious consequences. In the spring of 42, 1,100 were arrested, 641 sent to concentration camps. Here's a picture from one of the camps. Because the teachers refused to accept the Nazi teaching, and in the end, Quisling gave up. He later said in a famous speech in Oslo, "You teachers destroyed everything for me." For me, growing up in Scandinavia, this is a very important part of our history. And this case study was studied by Gene Sharp in 1958 when he came to Oslo to work together with Johan Galtung and Arne Næss about nonviolence. And he was so inspired by the by the teachers' struggle in 42. So that was when he decided to focus his life on nonviolent civilian-based defense. In the 80s, the Polish workers occupied the factories against the communist regime run by the Soviet and Warsaw Pact, and they won. A long, important struggle, took them 9 years. Other cases are in the former French colonies in Africa. Here is from Benin, 89, who took to the streets, a huge part of the civil society, trade unions, women's movements, farmers, and they forced the government to have more democratic elections and more openness and respect for human rights. In Berlin, 89, most of you remember that story, and there is more to be studied on that case. Or in the Philippines in 86, when Marcos were forced to leave in a helicopter after 1 million people took to the streets in Manila. In 2000, the Serbian students in the Otpor movement, together with a part of the civil society, didn't give up the struggle against Milosevic. NATO bombed them in the spring of 99, but Milosevic stayed in power. The students, half a year later, or 1 year later, were able to move him out of office, and Serbia became more democratic after that, with non-violent actions. When people ask me, how could it function against the military power or a strong state with security forces and police forces? For me, this is a question about power, political power. And I don't want to have a long discussion about how to define power, but that's the starting point. We could differentiate between power over and power to. I got a very early lesson on these two kinds of power when I was 18, and I was called up for military service in the NATO army. It was NATO versus me, 18-year-old by myself. And I realized that I had the power to decide if I should be a soldier or not. NATO had the power to punish me They put me in prison for 16 months. But it was a very, very important lesson for me to understand that I had the power to oppose NATO and be successful. They never managed to make a soldier out of me because I refused to cooperate with them. The main idea with all these ideas is that power being dependent on cooperation. When I refused to do my military service, I never became a soldier. And that is used in many different contexts in other situations. It could be described as the old Greek temple, where the state power is resting on pillars. People are paying taxes, they are working, doing military service, police do their job, people are obedient, the bureaucracy is functioning, and a number of other supporting pillars to the state power. And the nonviolent idea is to weaken these support pillars for the political power. When Gandhi refused to pay salt tax in India, he weakened that specific pillar. In Poland, they went on strikes. What we saw in Egypt against the authoritarian regime there some years ago, where people were refusing to be obedient. They took to the streets, occupied the squares, went on strikes. And we also seen, like in Serbia, the bureaucracy stopped functioning. So when you weaken or remove these support pillars, in the end, there are only a couple of pillars left, namely the military and the police. And when even they starting to get cracks, the political power can't hold up anymore and it collapses. This is a lesson for how to organize. There are different pillars in every context, in every situation, but identify supporting pillars for the power you are opposing and start attacking them with non-violent means. The successful movements we have seen have used a wide variety of different actions. They've done some preparations, often not enough. They're using creativity, and they're able to build strong alliances with people who maybe they don't agree with on every discussion, but they agree on what they are against and what they want to remove. And they've been able to combine theories and skills. And they have a deep understanding of the context. Those movements have not copied others, but built their own design for how to fight against the power structures. Like David mentioned at the beginning here, the book by Maria and Erika on these hundreds of cases in the world history was a very important study. It proved for us that the non-violent movements are more successful than the violent ones. Not perfect, and there are violent movements that could have some success stories, but the success stories for the non-violent movements are much more dominant than the violent ones. And over years, from 1940 to 2006, we've seen the non-violent movements being stronger and more successful. That might have changed a little the last 10 years, but it's still a dominant trend that non-violence are more successful against authoritarian regimes and occupations. And they also have a tendency to have better results. The probability of being a democracy 5 years after the conflict has ended, 4% for violent campaigns, 41% for non-violent campaigns. Not perfect, but quite good. And the probability of experiencing a new civil war within 10 years, 43% for the violent campaigns, 28% for non-violent campaigns. These are important facts that could inspire people who want to change this, to fight for democracy and change their own societies. And in that book, they also list a number of internal factors, like the level of mobilization, how much of the population could you mobilize, the social cohesion in society, or the unity of the movement, or the legitimacy and the popular support for these campaigns, and the range of tactics and types of methods, how effective the leadership is, and the discipline to stick to the non-violent tactics, even when you are attacked with violent means. These are important factors for successful movements. A number of us have been engaged in external support. And I think it's important to differentiate between the early phase and the peak phase and the post phase of the conflict. The support you could give before the conflict are in the headlines in newspapers, before the police attacking you, before the story is in every TV channel, is different from the support you could give people when the conflict is at the most heat. And not to forget, what support could we give after the peak has passed and the situation is less violent? We need different kind of external support for each of these three phases. And if you look on what has been done, some external support has been important for these movements. That means it's been very helpful for them. Some support might be necessary for the movements to succeed. In theory, some support could be sufficient. I haven't found any examples yet, but I don't rule it out that some external support could be sufficient for a successful non-violent takeover of a state. Quite a lot of the support is irrelevant. It doesn't matter. It may create a feeling of participation and proudness of those who try to support, but in reality, it doesn't help very much. And some support from external actors have been counterproductive. We have done stupid things, and we have done things that has been bad for the movement. Different kinds of support. Moral support, quite easy to give. Diplomacy and political support, very much up to the states to do that. Training and consultancy, part of the civil society do that. Financial support, that is the most discussed part of external support. All these examples of people believe that if Americans pay enough dollars to a movement, they will succeed. That was a big discussion in Serbia in 2000. And practical support, helping them with the practical organizing and dissemination of what they're doing. And solidarity participation. In the last 20 years, all these peace brigades of different kinds, non-violent peace forces being actively working in the conflict zone. These 6 examples should be studied more, and we should do more of it. But we shouldn't be convinced that whatever you do, it will be good for them. We need to be very critical to what we do and evaluate. I understand people are very proud when they could take part in these kinds of support, but it's not enough just to do it without knowing the result. And I'm lacking critical analysis of the impact of these external supports. How to replace the old system? We have seen a number of cases where the old regime has been forced to step down, and then a new regime has taken over. Not always the best example of good societies. How to keep the unity after the fall of the old regime? How to do more preparation prior to the victory? How can we start training people long before they see the need for it? And who are the external actors we should be dependent on? All these networks of activists around the world who want to help, but maybe don't have the skills or the resources to do it. How could we strengthen them? Some are doing very good jobs, but I think there's much more to be done on that level. My last 5 years I've been spending on what we call constructive resistance. And the idea was that to remove the old system is not sufficient. And it's obviously easier to remove than to replace. You could get rid of a dictator, but how to replace him? That's a key question for me in these days. Examples of combining resistance with building the new society at the same time. Build the new structures, build a society with the values you would like to see in the future. I have a book coming out later this month on that. And we have been looking for examples around the world of constructive resistance, and we hope to follow up on more studies on that type of nonviolent action to build good societies. This was the report that came out a year ago, a little more than a year ago, with these examples from Ukraine in the first month of the war. Much more should be done to study what really happened on the ground and in other conflicts as well, of course. And there is a lot of academic studies. This is a drone that I've been engaged in the last 10 years, who are trying to take the field of resistance studies into the academic circles. And there are a number of university programs on constructive resistance these days, and on resistance more in general. My hope for the future: more and better documentation of nonviolent actions, and not only bragging about the success stories, but also critically analyzing what went wrong. Much more dissemination of the results, and in more languages than English. I would like to see many more languages being part of the dissemination process. Better strategies and trainings. I don't see any reason why a nonviolent movement and nonviolent activists need less preparation than the soldiers in an army. Soldiers in most cases get at least 12 months of full-time training before they are sent to the conflict zone. I see very few nonviolent activists doing the same. And I do not doubt that they have good intentions, but without the skills, it's not always very successful. States will not deliver nonviolent training. Not even the most liberal states in Northern Europe will ever do that, because they're afraid the activists could use these skills against their own government. I've been part of those who refused military service, and those who've been doing alternative service in Scandinavia, Netherlands, Germany, France, Spain. And they've always demanded to have nonviolent training instead of military training. And never ever have a state really delivered any serious trainings to them. And I think the reason is obvious. They're afraid of these skills. If you had 100,000 activists well trained in nonviolent actions, that would be an enormous challenge for the state when they're coping with the climate campaigns and the peace movements. I promised to end after 45 minutes, and I think I've been talking for half an hour now. Any questions or comments, either now, or you could send me later.
I have collected a great deal of questions, and whenever you are ready, I will ask them of you.
Come on.
First question. It seems like there are a lot of examples of taking action before an occupation is completed. The whole taking down of street signs and redirecting traffic and blocking tanks and talking soldiers out of tanks and so forth. Why do you say most actions are after an occupation has been fully established?
I didn't say fully established. I said the occupation is ongoing. And mean, these examples you mentioned are most famous from Czechoslovakia in '68. And that was while the Warsaw Pact was marching into Czechoslovakia. You don't see it very much before the soldiers are at your border. It could be done, but I haven't seen many examples of it.
Why did you have to join the NATO military when Sweden was not a NATO member?
I was not living in Sweden in those days. I was living in Norway, a small fascist country in the north of Europe.
Yes, indeed. How do you respond to the nonsense question? Should Ukraine just lie down and surrender?
No, actively using nonviolent techniques to fight against the occupation.
How is your message received in Sweden?
Badly. It's difficult to get anything out in the national media. I think I got 2 articles in the last 2 years when it comes to Ukraine and the ongoing arms export and the NATO membership there. When I was living in Norway in my young years, I was supporting a group of people who mapped all the secret US military bases in Norway because they want to remove them. And that was ending, I was accused of spying. I was risking 21 years in prison for spying against the US when we detected these military bases. I was not very popular, to say it shortly. I've never been. Pacifists are not very popular in any state.
Understood. Got a lot more questions. I think you can probably stop sharing screen if you want and people can see you instead.
I'm not very nice to look at, but let me see if I could do it. Stop sharing. Where is that?
When we talk about a large unarmed defense team going in to serve a purpose, we're often told it's a fantasy.
Yeah.
How do you get people to understand the possibility of something that hasn't been done before? I mean, it's like most important things in the history of the world hadn't been done before they were done, but how do you get people to understand that?
Well, it was possible to land on the moon without doing it earlier. That was a big project. Now, I mean, I think we need to spend more time on education from early years on. In the last 2 years, I've been setting up a Montessori school for 9th to 12th grades with focus on nonviolence, trying to catch the young people before they are too much destroyed by the media situation and the politics in Europe. I'm not sure I have the answers, but we need to continue fight for the values and the ideas. I remember I had the meeting with Arne Næss. Some of you know Arne Næss, a Norwegian philosopher. And we complained about all the difficulties we had in the environmental movement, in the peace movement, the poisonous destruction of nature. And Arne said, I don't care if you're an optimist or pessimist, but it is your damn duty to act as if you were an optimist. That's the only human thing to do. And I try to follow that. I still continue. I've been active for 50 years now, and I will continue some more years until I end up as a compost.
What are common elements in the nonviolent overthrows of authoritarian leaders?
It is that the people have the courage to oppose them in public and not taking to violence themselves. When the protesters and demonstrators take to violent means, the state will win in most cases. So have the discipline to stay peaceful, even if you are opposed with brutal military and police forces, is very important.
What lesson, if any, do you draw from the Iraq war being launched following 20 million people taking part in demonstrations?
That we were too late and too badly organized. We had good intentions and and with opinions, but they were not strong enough to really oppose the occupying states where they are. I think the military system is too strong for us, and we could mobilize in half a year millions of people, but walking around the streets in capitals in Europe didn't help very much. The few brave people who went to Iraq did maybe a more important impact than those who stayed back home in their home countries and protested. The state could accept big demonstrations without taking notice of what we were demanding. I hope next time we could organize with the trade unions and go on strikes and more powerful escalations of nonviolent techniques than just walking around and shouting no to war.
Where can people get leadership training?
I don't know. I don't see very many of them. I have over the years been invited to war academies. And I have to be honest with you, some of the students in the war academies around the world are more interesting than the peaceniks I meet on peace camps. They are better educated, they have more understanding of history, and they understand also the military weaknesses better than most of the peaceniks I meet in the peace movement. So maybe we could learn something from the military system. I don't know. I don't have the good answer.
Has anyone refuted the data and the conclusions of Chenoweth and Stefan?
There have been some critiques, but most of it stands against all these critiques. And there are more studies coming out after that book that confirm their findings.
You talk about the difficulty of getting people to prepare before it's needed rather than when it's too late, but governments and people seem perfectly happy to dump all kinds of resources into preparing for violence before it's needed. Why the difference?
We're living in a very strange world. Those who have the violent power are very often more respected than those who are peaceful. It's very sad, very strange. I don't really know how it come to be like that. There are a few exceptions, but in most cases, those with the guns and the powers are listened to and get the resources.
What can people from outside Ukraine do to assist nonviolent action in Ukraine?
Go there. Ask the local people what to do. And be humble, but don't come with the solution. But go there and ask people for what sort of support they need.
The nonviolent revolution. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I mean, ask Yuri and his friends.
Maybe I should jump to a question from Yuri, and I will read it because I do not claim to understand it. In many models of conflict escalation, war is utter stage of conflict escalation. Since you insist that war is not conflict, and this clearly needs elaboration because war is usually defined as armed conflict, then what is your model of conflict escalation and how to prevent escalation from irrational, nonviolent stubbornness of leaders to harmful collective behavior, violence, and war? The military widely used nonviolent psyops as a tool of war.
I had that discussion with Yuri for some months now, and it's quite complicated, but I'm willing to send you an article I wrote about nonviolent escalation, and you could distribute it to the people in the conference. It's a big topic, but important one. I strongly believe that the peace movement must be better on escalating conflicts with peaceful means.
As your example of strikes in addition to protests in opposing the war in Iraq.
I mean, you can escalate by having more people participating. You can continue for a longer time, more radical actions. There's a big difference between having a legal demonstration outside an embassy and to using civil disobedience, that's an escalation. I mean, Martin Luther King was very eager to talk about escalation of nonviolent techniques, and I think he was right.
I think so too. The nonviolent revolutions in India, Egypt, and the Philippines were successful in short term, but have lost long term. Can you share more about how we can work for the nonviolent societal transformation, not just throwing out a dictator?
That book I mentioned that is just out is giving examples of how that could be done. And we need to start preparing for the new society, building the society we would like to live in. Then you're struggling against the old system and not only focusing on getting rid of the bad things, but creating the new society here and now. That is the short answer.
Do you another one I'm not sure I understand. Do you think Russia would tolerate peaceful demonstrations in Ukraine? What if the protesters are shot, tortured, or worse?
Yeah, there are risks. First of all, I don't really like to talk about Russia. There are a number of things inside what you call Russia, different groups, individuals, even inside the power structures on the top. In Kremlin, there are a number of division lines. I was in Chechnya during the war there, the last big invasion by Russia into Chechnya. And I realized that the Russian army was very divided. I saw Russian officers selling weapons to Dudayev during the war, used against them the next day. And I asked Dudayev, why the hell should these Russian officers buy weapons from you? They'll be used against them the next day. And he said, well, they haven't been paid for 2 years, so they want money to send back to their families. And they need all the money they have. So they want money from me and I want weapons from them. All these irrational things going on in the war zones. And it's much more than you could see in the media. And Russia as a unit is extremely complex. So what Russia will do is not only what Putin will do, it's all the other citizens of different kinds. And I really hope that more people would go to Russia these days. The boycott going on in Europe is completely stupid, absolutely disastrous. If you want to have good relations with your neighbor for the next 100 years, you can't boycott them when they need it as much. Putin is gone for some day, and we don't know who will replace him. But I really hope that the European states could have good relations to the civil society in Russia now and for the future.
Very good advice. Maybe this will be the last question from Liz. Jørgen, how do we get more unity in the peace movement, which can get very fragmented?
Yeah, big question. I don't really know. I've been, honestly, I think we have a quite good number of excellent people in the peace movement, but we also have some bad apples. And we have people with mental problems. We have people who are problematic in many ways. And we've not been very good on coping with that. We try to forget about it and be silent about it. I would like to have more open discussion. What to do with the troublesome people inside our own movement. And we don't dare to talk about that very often. You could do it in small groups, but not on the bigger level. And much more, I mean, let us evaluate what we have done more critically and learn some lessons from our past 50 years of peace activism in war zones.
Great advice. I think we're pretty well on schedule for wrapping this up. Can we virtually thank Jørgen Johansen for this wonderful presentation?
Well, thank you. I'm going to bed very soon because this is past midnight for me and I have a lot of work to do tomorrow morning. But,
Understood.
Good luck with the conference and I hope you get something out of it. And you got my email if you want to have more contacts. Ask me questions.
Thank you. Thank you.
But I send you the article then about conflict escalation if you want it.
Yes, we will share anything you send with everybody who registered.
Thank you. Okay. Bye for now.
Thank you so much. And I want to also thank everyone for the extremely thoughtful questions. This was an exemplary shared online global conversation, I would say. And we feel like I'm just so thrilled that I think this will be a sign of the discussions to come throughout the weekend. It is not over for tonight, though I understand that for those for whom it is 2 a.m. right now, you may need to take a pause and come back tomorrow. But for the rest of us, I hope that you will continue. We are now having just a short break where we'll be opening up the expo booths. So this is the part of, let's say, an in-person conference where you would see many organizations at their table, sharing brochures, letting you know what they do and how you can get involved. We have a virtual version of that you can access after you close this meeting. At the top of the screen, you can click on Expo. And we would encourage, if there are booth reps here, to go to your booth and then you can talk to people in person. We also have a session reflection booth, which is open to anyone who just wants to chat with other people at the conference about what you've just heard. So again, the way you get to these booths is you'll leave the Zoom meeting by clicking the red button in the bottom right. And then in the Zoom conference window that will still be open underneath, you'll click on the Expo tab at the top, and then you can click on different Expo booths. So I'll invite everyone to have fun exploring the Expo floor, take a short break, and then to join us back in the sessions tab or from the main lobby in 25 minutes from now in quarter to the hour, when we will come back together for our first panel of the conference, followed by a live peace concert featuring some incredible award-winning musicians we can't wait to hear all together. So we'll see you in 25 minutes, and thanks again all.